The first anomaly was so subtle that it almost went unnoticed in the welcoming chaos of Christmas. For 12-year-old Noah, his grandma Eleanor's house was the setting for every Christmas he could remember. A wooden cottage nestled in a forest that the snow insisted on isolating from the rest of the world. The scent of pine and cedar branches burning in the fireplace mingled with that of fresh gingerbread, creating a synesthesia of coziness. His older sister, 17-year-old Lily, already considered it all nostalgic cheesiness, but for Noah, every detail was magical. His mother, Sarah, struggled to keep the spirit alive since their father passed away, a void that Christmas tried in vain to fill. It was Noah who noticed it first. Tucked among the colorful packages under the tree, another gift. A small package made of rough brown paper, tied with a dark red, almost black satin ribbon. There was no tag, no name. "Who is this?" Sarah asked, the lines of worry on her forehead deepening. Everyone shook their heads. Grandma Eleanor, whose memory was beginning to crumble like an old biscuit, just shook her head, her blurry eyes fixed on the package as if it were a faded photograph of a forgotten nightmare. The second anomaly was auditory. While Lily mocked the ugly wrapping, the tube radio in the kitchen, tuned to a Christmas music station, suffered interference. The cheerful melody of Jingle Bells became distorted, dragging on in a minor key, the bells sounding like muffled metallic laughter before returning to normal. Everyone fell silent for a second. "It's the weather. The antenna must be covered in ice," Sarah said, more to herself than to her children. The third, and most disturbing, was visual. Hanging from the tree, among the silver bubbles and wooden angels, was a new ornament. Noah swore it hadn't been there before. It was an elongated figure, made of a dark, resinous material that seemed to absorb light, not reflect it. It was roughly human-shaped, but its limbs were thin and twisted like dry branches. The face, crudely carved, had no eyes, only two empty sockets, and its mouth was a small O of silent surprise. Suspended by a wire, it rotated slowly, with an unnatural slowness, as if resisting the physics of pendulum motion. "Lily, did you put this here?" Sarah asked, her voice a little higher pitched. Why would I put something so ugly on her mom? She rolled her eyes, but Noah saw the brief tremor in her hands as she turned on her phone. It was Grandma Eleanor who whispered, her voice a rustling of dry leaves. "It's the messenger. He comes first. To see who's on the list." The silence that followed was heavier than any sound. The snow continued to fall outside, trapping the family in that postcard scene that, pixel by pixel, was becoming corrupted. Dinner was tense. The turkey, normally succulent, seemed dry and bland. The bright red cranberry sauce uncomfortably reminded Noah of the ribbon from the mysterious gift. The sounds of the house, normally comforting, had become sinister. The crackling of the firewood in the fireplace sounded like bones being broken. The whistling wind in the chimney seemed to whisper names. The perspective shifted to Lily. To her, the family's paranoia was an exaggeration. Her grandmother was senile, her mother was stressed, and Noah was impressionable. But even she couldn't ignore the feeling of being watched. It was an itch between her shoulders, a pressure in her eardrums. She went to get a bottle of water from the kitchen, and as she passed through the empty living room, saw the dark ornament. It wasn't spinning anymore. It was still, its empty eye sockets fixed directly on the kitchen door, as if it had watched her leave. "Idiot," she whispered to herself, forcing herself not to run back to the dining room. Night fell, and with it the snowstorm intensified, burying the family car and cutting the power. The darkness was sudden and absolute, broken only by the candles Sarah lit with trembling hands. Shadows danced on the walls, turning the familiar outlines of the furniture into crouching monsters. The claustrophobic, once cozy atmosphere was now a snow-padded prison. That's when the sound started, coming from outside, above the howling wind. A slow, heavy dragging sound, as if something enormous with chained feet were circling the house. Shh, clank, shh, clank. It stopped beneath the living room window, and everyone held their breath. Then it continued. Terrified, Noah cowered on the sofa next to his mother. Lily feigned disdain, but her nails were dug into her palms. Grandma Eleanor merely rocked back and forth, humming softly a melody that wasn't any Christmas carol they knew. The sound stopped, this time directly outside the front door. The family's breathing synchronized, trapped in their lungs. The darkness was oppressive, and the silence that followed the dragging was 10 times more terrifying. Then a new sound. Low, rough, like stones being rubbed against each other. A voice, she whispered through the crack under the door, a sound that pierced the bone. Noah. It was the whisper that broke Lily. She let out a muffled cry, and then came the noise in the chimney. It wasn't the wind. It was something solid, heavy, scraping against the brick coming down. A sound of claws on stone, of something writhing to fit into the tight space. A spark of hot ashes fell into the fireplace, and in the brief flash Noah saw a dark shape. A tangle of twisted limbs blocked the upper opening for an instant before continuing its descent. Sarah pulled her children close, her eyes wide with primal terror. The dragging of chains now echoed within the fireplace, accompanied by a damp, panting creak. The brown paper gift under the tree, forgotten by everyone, began to move. It trembled, then tore open inside out, and the dark ornament on the Christmas tree fell from its branch, hitting the wooden floor with a dry, hollow crack. It didn't break. Instead, it split perfectly in two, and from its interior, a black, sticky substance began to bubble, spreading across the floor like a liquid shadow, heading towards you. The last thing Noah saw, before the candles went out on their own, plunging them into absolute darkness, were his mother's eyes. Glazed and filled with pure, undeniable horror, fixed on the thing that was now crawling out of the fireplace into the room. Darkness engulfed them, and the only sound was the damp creaking of that presence and the sweet, rotten smell of burnt flesh and pine. The darkness was a living being. It pressed against my eardrums, weighed on my lungs, and extinguished any sense of safety. For a moment that stretched into an eternity of dread, the only reality was the sound coming from the fireplace, a damp, gasping creak, like lungs full of tar, and the metallic drag of chains skimming across hot ashes. The light returned not as a miracle, but as a malfunction in the horror's system. Grandma Eleanor's emergency generator, an old gasoline-powered contraption stored in the basement, sputtered, coughed, and finally powered the room's emergency lights. The light was dim, yellowish, and flickering, creating a strobe effect that froze the nightmare in static frames. Picture 1. The fireplace was empty, only ashes and a piece of half-burnt firewood. Panel 2. Sarah, Lily, and Noah, huddled on the sofa, their arms intertwined like the branches of a tree in a storm. Panel 3. Grandma Eleanor, standing in the center of the room, her frail figure erect, pointing a bony finger towards the floor. "Look," whispered the grandmother, her voice clear as ice, a chilling lucidity taking over her eyes. "The list." Everyone looked where she was pointing. The brown paper gift was torn, its insides exposed. Around it, scattered on the wooden floor, was not the black substance Noah had seen, but a pile of charcoal. Irregular pieces of charcoal, glistening in the dim light like insect eyes, and upon them lay a yellowed, crumpled parchment, tied with the same dark red ribbon as the package. The point of view shifted to Sarah. Maternal instinct overwhelmed the paralyzing terror. She stood, her legs trembling, and approached. The air smelled of soot and an aggressive sweetness like spoiled honey. She knelt, her breath forming clouds in the icy air that now dominated the room, and reached for the parchment. "Mom, no!" Lily screamed, her voice a mixture of disdain and panic. Sarah ignored it. Her fingers touched the paper. It was cold and rough like snakeskin. She unrolled it. The handwriting was a twisted, prickly thing, red ink that looked fresh and pulsating. They weren't words, not initially. They were symbols, small, grotesque drawings that her mind refused to interpret correctly, but which, somehow, she understood perfectly. An image of a long tongue emerging from a stylized mouth. A figure holding a shiny object, a cell phone. Another, smaller figure with a puzzle emblem. A tree with an ornament that had empty cavities for eyes. It was a list. A list of transgressions. "What is it, Mom?" Noah asked, his voice a whisper. Sarah looked up, her face as pale as the snow outside. It's you, Lily. This drawing. It's you bad-mouthing Grandma last night, saying she was a burden." Lily paled, her disdain evaporating. That's ridiculous. And you, Noah." Sarah's voice broke. "This is you breaking your father's jigsaw puzzle in anger last month. You swore no one saw." Noah swallowed hard, his hands beginning to tremble. Sarah continued reading, her voice a horrified whisper. "And I lied to my sister about not being able to visit her on Thanksgiving. I said I was sick." She looked at the last symbol, the tree with the ornament. "And this must be the messenger, the ornament Grandma talked about." The ornament. Everyone looked at the Christmas tree. The dark, twisted figure had vanished. The wire that held it together swung empty, like a gallows after an execution. "It's Krampus," Grandma Eleanor said, her voice clear again and laden with an ancient terror. "Not the one from the movies. The real one. The ancient one. He doesn't come on St. Nicholas Day. He comes before. To inspect, to judge. The messenger was his eye. And now he has the list." The wind roared outside and the windows rattled in their frames. The sound of dragging chains, clank, clank, returned, but this time it didn't come from outside. It came from the dark hallway that led to the bedrooms. Lily, driven by a fear that transcended her teenage arrogance, ran to the front window and wiped the ice from the glass with her sleeve. The snow was falling so heavily it was like staring at a white wall. But then, for a brief second, the wind swirled and she saw it. In the snow, directly in front of the window, was a single footprint. It was enormous, elongated, with the mark of 4 long, curved claws on the front and a forked hoof shape on the heel. And beside it, dragged across the pristine snow, was a dark red stain, like blood. She let out a muffled squeal and recoiled, tripping on the Persian rug. "He's inside," Noah whispered, his eyes wide. Fixed on the darkness of the hallway, the radio in the kitchen, powered by the generator, spat out static for a moment before a distorted, metallic voice echoed through the room, singing a slow, drawn-out version of Silent Night. The voice sounded raspy, pained. Silent night, holy night. All is calm, all is bright. The sound of chains in the hallway stopped. The music from the radio also stopped. The silence was broken by a slow, deliberate scratching on the hallway door. It was the sound of wood being carved, of sharp nails tracing a pattern. Sarah stood up, taking the heavy brass candlestick from the fireplace. "Stand behind me," she ordered, her voice trembling but determined. The scratching stopped. Then the doorknob began to turn, slowly, with a metallic creak that seemed to tear through the very air. The emergency light flickered once, then twice. On the second-to-last flicker, the door was ajar, and a tall, dark shape, seemingly absorbing the dim light, filled the opening. They couldn't see any details, just a silhouette of twisted horns and broad, sloping shoulders. In the final flicker, before the light failed completely and plunged them back into absolute darkness, a harsh voice like stones rubbing together, whispered from a point just inches from Sarah's face, laden with an icy, foul breath. "I'm just getting started." The darkness that followed the whisper was a physical blow. Noah let out a muffled groan, and Sarah recoiled blindly, bumping into the sofa and knocking over the candlestick with a dull thud that echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. The icy, foul breath still lingered in the air, a mixture of grave dirt and rotting flesh. The emergency light flickered again, unstable, like a dying heart. The hallway was empty. The door, however, was now wide open, revealing the deep darkness that swallowed the rest of the house. The scratch on the wood wasn't a random pattern. They were runes, or something worse, carved deep into the white paint. Lily was the first to move. She crawled across the floor, picking up the cell phone that had fallen from the sofa. The screen was dead. No button, no key combination made it react. "No, she whispered, her technological despair a stark contrast to the ancient horror that surrounded them. She looked at the charger on the wall. The indicator light was off. The generator powered the lights, but not the outlets. They were truly cut off from the world. "He's playing games with us," Sarah said, her voice hoarse. She still held the parchment in her left hand, her fingers white from gripping it tightly. "The list? He didn't come to get us. He just came to show us that he knows." The point of view shifted to Noah. His initial terror was transforming into a morbid and dangerous curiosity. While his mother and sister were paralyzed with fear in the dark hallway, his eyes were drawn to the Christmas tree. The messenger ornament was gone, but something new had appeared. Hanging from the highest branch in place of the star was a small gingerbread man. Only this wasn't the usual smiling, friendly man. His form was distorted, his arms and legs far too long and thin. His mouth, made of white icing, was a wide, joyless grin, full of sharp points. And where the sugar eyes should have been, there were two small, dry green peas that seemed to stare at Noah with a disturbing intensity. "The gingerbread man." Noah pointed. Everyone looked. Grandma Eleanor, who had been in a near catatonic state, shook her head. "The spies. He puts the spies there, to see what the list didn't see." Sarah approached the tree. "It's just a cookie, Mom," but her voice faltered. She reached out to pick it. "Don't touch him." Her grandmother's voice was like a whip. Sarah froze. "Touch him, and he'll know you know." "It's worse," Sarah recoiled, her courage waning. The family was surrendering to a nightmarish logic, governed by rules they didn't understand. That's when the sounds began. They weren't streams or whispers. They were music, coming from every room. From the kitchen, the old tube radio played a sped-up, out-of-tune version of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, sounding like a runaway Ferris wheel. From Grandma's room, a mechanical music box played Joy to the World in a drawn-out, ghostly tone, as if it were being played underwater. And from the dark hallway, a chorus of children's voices, high-pitched and soulless, sang, "We wish you a Merry Christmas." The voices overlapped, creating a dissonant cacophony that hammered their brains. The noise was unbearable. Lily covered her ears, her eyes squeezed shut in pain. "Stop, please, stop." Noah, almost in a trance, walked towards the hallway drawn by the children's voices. They seemed to be coming from the bathroom at the end of the hall. The door was ajar. "Noah, no!" Sarah shouted, but he was already moving, driven by an impulse he didn't even understand himself. The emergency light in the hallway was even dimmer. The voices grew louder, more urgent. "We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas." He pushed open the bathroom door. Inside, there was no one. The source of the sound was the drain in the shower stall. From it, the ghostly chorus rose along with a sweet, nauseating smell of fermentation. Noah looked at the drain, its dirty metal edges. The stagnant water at the bottom bubbled slightly, as if many tiny voices were singing from inside the pipes. He was about to back away when he saw the sink. On it, arranged in a perfect row, were 3 small gingerbread men, all with the same pointed smile and pea-sized eyes. And behind them, trapped in the fogged mirror, written in the steam with an invisible finger, was a single word. Natal, but the L was running, turning into a long, vertical line. Cream, a vertical list, a crossed-out name. He heard a creaking sound behind him and turned around. The door of the wire closet next to the bathroom was slowly opening by itself. From inside, a smell of mothballs and something else, metallic like old blood. The darkness inside the closet was thicker than it should have been. The voices in the drain screamed at the top of their lungs in a dissonant climax. "We wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year." And then, silence. The silence was broken by the sound of something heavy and soft falling from the linchpin cupboard onto the hallway floor, with a damp thud and the metallic jingle of tiny bells. Noah froze, his eyes fixed on the dark, indistinct shape now huddled on the hallway floor just a few feet away. He could hear the panting, hoarse breathing coming from there. Across the hallway, in the living room, Sarah and Lily saw Noah frozen in the doorway of the bathroom, staring at something on the floor they couldn't see. "Noah!" Sarah shouted, starting to run towards him. Before she could reach it, the thing on the hallway floor moved. A long, pale arm covered in dark down stretched out, not toward Noah, but toward the wall. Sharp claws, the color of old bone, scratched the floral wallpaper. And then he began to crawl. Not toward Noah, but toward the room. Toward them. The sound of chains dragging on the wooden floor filled the hallway, much louder and closer than before. Noah finally broke out of his catatonic state and ran back into the room, bumping into his mother. They stumbled back together, tripping on the rug. The thing was now on the threshold between the hallway and the room, the pulsating light revealing it in horrifying flashes. They saw no face, no defined body. They saw only a mass of shadows, twisted horns, and the glint of dozens of small black bells sewn into its skin, which tinkled softly with each of its movements. He stopped in the doorway, his presence an icy chill in the air. His head, an indistinct shape, turned slowly, sweeping the room. It seemed to pass by Sarah, by Lily, by Grandma Eleanor, and then it stopped at Noah. A long, trembling, pale finger, ending in a claw, pointed directly at the boy. The voice, when it came, was not a whisper, but a low, triumphant croak, like that of a raven. The boy lies. The pale finger remained pointed at Noah, a silent accusation that weighed more than any scream. The boy lies. The words echoed in the room, mingling with the ghostly tinkling of black bells stitched into the mass of shadows. Noah felt his legs give way. "I didn't," he whispered, but his voice trailed off in his throat. The memory of his father's puzzle, shattered in a fit of rage, burned in his mind. But there was something more, something not even the list had captured, a small, rotten secret he carried alone. The thing at the door emitted a sound that might have been a laugh, a damp creaking of lungs filled with ash. Then it moved, not into the room, but backward, retreating into the darkness of the hallway. The dragging of chains faded, and the air pressure decreased by a degree. It hadn't come to seize them, only to accuse, to sow discord. The emergency light stabilized, bathing the room in a sickly yellow. The silence was now as oppressive as the noise had been. Sarah turned to Noah, her face a mask of worry and confusion. "Noah, what did he mean? What are you hiding?" "It's nothing, Mom." "He's lying." Noah's voice came out shrill, an octave higher than normal. Lily looked at her brother with renewed distrust. "Is this happening because of you?" She spat the words out. "Did you do something?" "Girls, stop." Sarah intervened, but the seed had already been planted. The shared trauma now had a crack, and fear was beginning to seep out of it. The perspective shifted to Lily. The accusation against Noah relieved her in a perverse way. If he was the target, perhaps she would be safe. Her practical mind, desperate for an anchor amidst the madness, clung to a single comforting memory. The snowman she and Noah had built the previous afternoon. An act of family unity before the nightmare began. It was out there in the front garden, a silent, pure testament to a simpler time. She crawled to the front window, ignoring her mother's protests, and wiped the steam from the glass with her hand. The snow was still falling heavily, but she could make out the shape of the snowman, a white silhouette against the white. But something was wrong. He was no longer facing the street, as they had left him. He was facing the house, and his form, it seemed taller, more defined. The arms, once made of twisted branches, now seemed more solid, almost like real limbs pressed against his body. And the face. Lily squinted. The buttons they used for eyes looked darker, deeper. The carrot-shaped nose seemed to have dripped, creating an orange stain on the snow below, like a wound. And the mouth, a line of tiny pebbles, was no longer a friendly smile. It was a straight, severe line. "He moved," Lily whispered. "Don't be ridiculous, Lily," Sarah said, rubbing her eyes. "It's the wind." "The wind doesn't turn a 6-foot-tall snowman around," she retorted, her voice beginning to tremble again. That's when the snowman blinked. It wasn't an optical illusion caused by the falling snow. The two dark buttons simply opened and closed, slowly, deliberately. Lily let out a scream and recoiled from the window, tripping on the rug. "He's alive." Noah ran to the window. "Lily, stop making things up." But then he saw it. The snowman's head tilted slightly, an almost imperceptible movement, and his black button eyes seemed to fix directly on him. A wave of cold that had nothing to do with the temperature ran down Noah's spine. He remembered his secret, the small object he had hidden in the snowman's coat pocket, a treasure he had taken from his father's room. An old silver whistle. Why would he do that? It was a childish prank, a stupid impulse. But now, under the snowman's empty gaze, it seemed like a desecration. Grandma Eleanor, who had been watching the scene from her armchair, spoke in a weary voice. The snow angel. He's not made of snow. He's made of cold memories. He guards the things that are hidden in the cold. Suddenly, a sharp sound cut through the air from outside. A whistle, thin, clear, and piercing. The sound of his father's silver whistle. Noah paled. It can't be. The whistle sounded again, closer this time, as if it were right outside the window. The snowman hadn't moved. His stone mouth remained still. The sound seemed to emanate from within him. The whistle blew a third time, and with it came an answer. From the woods behind the house, a long, agonizing howl rose, not from a wolf or wind, but something older and hungrier. It was followed by another and another, until a cacophony of howls surrounded the house, coming from all directions. The snowman, under the pulsating light that leaked through the window, seemed to smile. His stony mouth curved upward at the corners, an expression of pure malice. Sarah ran to the window and saw. She saw the snowman's eyes, now glowing with a pale bluish inner light. She saw the snow around her beginning to churn, as if things were moving beneath, drawing closer to the house. "He's not a snowman," Sarah said, her voice a thread of horror. "He's a lighthouse. He's calling to them." The howls outside grew louder, mingling with the distant tinkling of bells. The whistle sounded once more, a triumphant and summoning sound, straight from the snow figure's chest. And then the thing in the garden moved. It didn't crawl, it didn't walk. The mass of snow that formed its torso reconfigured itself, and a long arm, thin and pointed like an ice branch, stretched out. The terminal hand, made of compacted snow, struck the window with a soft, terrifying tap. The mark he left on the glass wasn't that of a human hand. It was a claw mark with 4 long fingers and an opposable thumb, all outlined in the frost that instantly formed on the glass. He was knocking on the door, and from the woods, the things that answered his call began to emerge from the blizzard, their dark and robust forms moving with a terrible hunger toward the defenseless house. The soft tap on the window echoed like thunder in the silent room. The frosted claw mark was the signature of a new level of horror. The snowman was no longer a spectator. He was an active participant, a conductor for the orchestra of nightmares that was approaching. The howls outside grew louder, closer. They were guttural, filled with a hunger that was almost intelligent. Sarah pulled back the heavy velvet curtains blocking the view but not the sound. The tinkling of bells now mingled with the howls, a macabre symphony that heralded the siege. "The basement," Sarah gasped, practical logic battling panic. "We need to lock ourselves in the basement." "The basement is worse," Grandma Eleanor whispered, her glazed eyes fixed on the closed curtain as if she could see through it. "That's where the roots of the house touches earth. That's where the leech is strongest." "Leech?" Lily asked, her voice trembling. "The thing in the walls," the grandmother replied simply. "It feeds on fear, and we're giving it a feast." The perspective shifted to Noah. The whistle. It had all started with that damned whistle. The sound still echoed in his ears, an audible guilt. His secret, small and stupid, had attracted this attention. Krampus's accusation, the boy, lies burned inside him. He turned to his family, his hands sweaty and cold. "It was me," he confessed, the words tumbling out. "I took Dad's whistle from his old uniform. I hid it in the snowman's pocket. Just to, I don't know, to have a piece of him with me. I didn't know." Sarah looked at him, and for the first time there was no anger in her eyes, only a deep weariness and infinite sadness. "Oh, Noah," she whispered. "The object wasn't the issue. The transgression was. He had taken something that wasn't his and hidden it in a place of apparent innocence, corrupting it. A new scent began to fill the room, overpowering the lingering aroma of pine and the stench of Krampus. It was a rich, earthy smell of spiced roast meat, smoked meats, sweetbreads, gravy. The smell of a Christmas feast. It came from the kitchen. Did someone forget to turn off the oven? Lily asked, confused, her mundane logic trying to cling to any explanation. The generator isn't powering the oven, Sarah said, her face pale. The smell grew stronger, more tempting, despite the situation. It was a smell that spoke to a primitive part of the brain, promising comfort, satiety, normalcy. The hunger, which they had ignored amidst the terror, began to gnaw at their insides. Cautiously, like sleepwalkers, they moved toward the kitchen. Sarah in front, holding the candlestick. Lily behind, holding Noah's hand. Grandma Eleanor stayed behind, sitting in her armchair, rocking and humming softly. The kitchen was immaculate, and it was full of food. On the solid wood table lay a feast, a golden and succulent turkey, a bowl of creamy mashed potatoes, green beans with almonds, cranberry sauce that shimmered like rubies, warm breads, a pumpkin pie, everything perfect, everything radiating an inviting warmth. It was the Christmas meal of their dreams, materialized out of nowhere. Good heavens, Lily whispered, her mouth watering involuntarily. Don't touch anything, Sarah warned, but her own voice was weak. The smell was intoxicating. Noah looked at the turkey. Its skin was perfectly golden, but there was a strange pattern on it, like dark veins intertwining in almost imperceptible spirals. And the pods. The sliced almonds on top seemed to arrange themselves like tiny eyes without lids. That's when he saw the center of the table. The main course wasn't the turkey. It was something smaller on a dark ceramic platter. It was a glossy black mass, covered in a thick dark red sauce. Smoked meats, sweetbreads, gravy, the smell of a Christmas feast. It came from the kitchen. Did someone forget to turn off the oven? Lily asked, confused, her mundane logic trying to cling to any explanation. The generator isn't powering the oven, Sarah said, her face pale. The smell grew stronger, more tempting despite the situation. It was a smell that spoke to a primitive part of the brain, promising comfort, satiety, normalcy. The hunger, which they had ignored amidst the terror, began to gnaw at their insides. Cautiously, like sleepwalkers, they moved toward the kitchen, Sarah in front holding the candlestick, Lily behind holding Noah's hand. Grandma Eleanor stayed behind, sitting in her armchair, rocking and humming softly. The kitchen was immaculate, and it was full of food. On the solid wood table lay a feast, a golden and succulent turkey, a bowl of creamy mashed potatoes, green beans with almonds, cranberry sauce that shimmered like rubies, warm breads, a pumpkin pie, everything perfect, everything radiating an inviting warmth. It was the Christmas meal of their dreams, materialized out of nowhere. Good heavens, Lily whispered, her mouth watering involuntarily. Don't touch anything, Sarah warned, but her own voice was weak. The smell was intoxicating. Noah looked at the turkey. Its skin was perfectly golden, but there was a strange pattern on it, like dark veins intertwining in almost imperceptible spirals. And the pods. The sliced almonds on top seemed to arrange themselves like tiny eyes without lids. That's when he saw the center of the table. The main course wasn't the turkey. It was something smaller on a dark ceramic platter. It was a black, glistening mass covered in a thick, dark red sauce. From it emanated an intense, metallic aroma that Noah recognized with a shiver. It was the smell of the iron from the supplement his grandmother took. It was the smell of blood. What is that? Lily asked, pointing to the serving dish. Before anyone could answer, the radio on the counter spat out static, and then a deep, silky voice like warm, poisoned honey filled the kitchen. It was the voice of a radio announcer from a bygone era, but with an otherworldly resonance. And remember, dear listeners, no gesture of hospitality is more important than sharing a meal. Participate in the feast. Eat. It is an offense to refuse the host's generosity. The host, Krampus. Sarah stepped back. "Don't eat it. It's a trap." But Lily was starving, and the smell was torture. Her arms stretched out almost involuntarily toward a warm, soft roll. "Lily, no!" Sarah shouted. It was too late. Lily's fingers closed around the bread. It was soft and warm, real. She brought it to her nose, inhaling deeply its aroma of butter and yeast. And then she saw it. Embedded in the bottom of the bread, like a raisin in a cake, was a human fingernail. Short, dirty, and clearly real. She let out a cry of disgust and threw the bread away. It bounced on the floor and rolled, stopping at the foot of the kitchen door. The voice on the radio chuckled, a deep, amused sound. "Ungrateful. He worked so hard to prepare everything for you. Look at the main course, the black meat pietà, a family recipe." His eyes were drawn back to the platter of black flesh. In the dim light, the mass began to move. It was not an illusion. It writhed slowly like a nest of worms. And then a form detached itself from the mass. Small, elongated, made of the same black resinous substance as the messenger ornament. It was a miniature figure. A figure of a man with thin limbs and a face of silent pain. The figure knelt on the flesh, its tiny hands raised in supplication. It was a perfect replica, in black flesh and blood, of the wooden puzzle Noah had broken. The transgression had been transformed into the main course. Noah vomited, doubling over the sink. The howling outside was now accompanied by scratches on the walls of the house, on the locked doors. Things had arrived. The party was the bait, and the trap was about to close. The voice on the radio whispered sweet and venomous, "Eat before they come in. Their hunger is very different from yours." The sound of Noah vomiting into the sink was drowned out by the scratching that now came from all directions. Wood creaked, glass trembled. The house was being tested, like a cage under attack by hungry predators. The smell of the wicked feast mingled with the acid of the vomit, creating a nauseating cocktail of horror. Sarah grabbed Lily, who was still frozen, staring at the fingernail embedded in the bread, and pulled Noah away from the sink. "Get out of here, now!" They ran back to the living room, the sanctuary that was no longer safe. Grandma Eleanor was still in her armchair, but now she held something in her lap. The small brown paper package, the first mysterious gift. She stroked it like a sick cat. "He wants us to open them," she whispered, her eyes gleaming with a feverish light. "All the presents. It's bad manners not to open Christmas presents." Outside, one of the howls turned into a low, guttural growl, followed by a heavy thud against the front door. The doorknob began to rattle violently. "Grandma, put that down," Sarah pleaded, pulling her children to the farthest corner of the room, away from the windows and the door. "But it's for us," the old woman insisted, her bony fingers beginning to pull at the dark red ribbon. "It's what he wants, to open the presents. It's tradition." The sound at the door stopped abruptly. A heavy, unnatural silence fell, broken only by the family's heavy breathing and the distant tinkling of bells coming. From upstairs? From the upper floor. The point of view shifted to Lily. Terror had burned away her hunger, leaving behind a frozen core of pure survival instinct. She looked at the Christmas tree. The colorful presents they had placed there now looked menacing, like the eggs of an alien creature about to hatch. And then she saw. There were more. New presents, wrapped in the same rough brown paper, tied with the almost black satin ribbon. They were piled under the tree, mixed in with the others like weeds in a garden. One of them, larger and rectangular, was moving. Slightly, a rhythmic tremor, as if something inside was breathing. "The presents," Lily whispered, pointing. "There are more." Sarah gripped the candlestick tighter. "No one touches anything." That's when the first gift, a small package with a green ribbon that Sarah recognized as being from Lily to Noah, began to bleed. A dark red stain grew on the shiny paper, running down the side and dripping onto the wooden floor with a tap, tap, tap. Noah choked. "What's inside?" Before anyone could answer, the larger, shifting brown paper gift trembled more violently. A tear appeared in the paper, and a sticky amber substance began to ooze out of it, smelling of rotten pine sap. Grandma Eleanor laughed, a humorless sound. "He's packing up the consequences, wrapping up the punishment with a pretty bow." The scratching returned, but not on the exterior walls. It came from inside the walls, a damp, persistent scratching sound rising from the basement, traveling along the walls of the room like a giant rat inside the drywall. The leech that Grandma had mentioned. Something was indeed moving inside the structure of the house. Loss. 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 The bloody gift continued to drip. The stain on the floor grew, forming a small, dark puddle. Shh. Clank. Shh. Clank. The sound of chains returned, descending the stairs. Slow. Deliberate. Krampus was among them, inside the house, circling upstairs. The pressure was unbearable. The combination of the external siege, the internal invasion, and the passive threat under the Christmas tree was about to break them. Noah was the first to move. Driven by a sudden desperation, he lunged toward the tree. "He wants the presents? Then let's open them. Let's see what he wants us to see." "Noah, no!" Sarah screamed, but he was already on his knees, clutching the smaller, bloody gift, the one with the green ribbon. With a sharp tug, he tore the paper. Inside, there wasn't a box. There was a Christmas ornament. The Christmas ornament Lily had given him the previous year, with a picture of the two of them inside. Only the picture had been altered. Noah's face was scratched out with a black marker, and Lily's face was pale and distorted. Her eyes were empty sockets. And the ornament wasn't empty. It was filled with a thick red liquid that sloshed inside, and floating in it was the fingernail Lily had seen on the bread. Noah threw the ball away with a cry of horror. It hit the fireplace and shattered, exploding, into 1,000 shards of glass and a splash of liquid that smelled of iron and copper. The larger brown paper gift trembled violently. The tear widened and a hand emerged. Small, pale, made of the same black resin as the ornament. It was the hand of the puzzle figure, now the size of a doll. It gripped the edge of the torn paper and pulled. The figure's head appeared, its features of silent pain now fixed on Noah. It opened its mouth and a sound came. Not from the figure, but from the radio in the kitchen, which had turned on by itself. "Liar! Sinner!" The thing upstairs stopped. The dragging of chains ceased. He was listening, and then all the other brown paper presents under the tree began to move at the same time, trembling, pulsing, like black hearts wrapped as gifts. One of them, small and square, began to hum "De'ai Hodoi," distorted version of "Deck the Halls" in a mechanical child's voice. The front door, which had withstood the attacks, creaked. A long crack appeared in the wood from top to bottom. The larger gift tore completely, and the full-bodied black figure fell to the floor. It was about 30 centimeters tall. It stood up, its thin limbs creaking, and began to walk toward Noah, its tiny feet making a click-clack sound on the wooden floor. The scratching inside the walls became frantic, as if the leech was excited about what was about to happen, and the howls from outside turned into a chorus of anxious, high-pitched barks. They knew the door wouldn't hold much longer. The black, resin figure pointed at Noah and then at the front door in an inviting yet menacing gesture. The humming gift exploded, not with a bang, but with a wet burst, scattering tiny bone fragments and strands of blonde hair across the carpet. The message was clear. The gifts weren't the main threat. They were the prelude. The final warning before the true punishment was delivered. The cracked door was the finish line, and the hunters outside were ready to exact their price. The wet thud of the gift echoed in the room, a grotesque final point in the sudden silence. Tiny bone fragments bounced on the Persian carpet, each tick a sound of madness. The black resin figure, now motionless, continued to point alternately at Noah and the front door, its silent sentence. The scratching inside the walls stopped. The howling outside ceased. Even the tinkling of bells upstairs disappeared. The only thing that could be heard was the family's panting, trembling breath and the dripping. of liquid from the broken Christmas ornament dripping onto the fireplace. Peace was like a knife. It was worse than the noise. Sarah pulled Noah back, away from the resin figure and the fragments of the exploded gift. She placed them behind the sofa, using the heavy piece of furniture as a makeshift shield. Lily joined them, her face a tearless mask of terror. "What's happening?" Noah whispered, his body trembling uncontrollably. "Why did you stop everything?" "He's getting ready," Grandma Eleanor said from her armchair. She didn't sound frightened, but resigned, like a prisoner listening to the executioner's footsteps in the hallway. "The main delivery is coming." The point of view shifted to Sarah. Her maternal instinct was at war with a primal terror. She stared at the front door, the massive crack in its frame like a scar. It was the only thing between her family and the hungry things outside. And she knew, with a nauseating certainty, that the door wasn't a barrier. It was a stage. The curtain was about to rise. Then a new sound began. It wasn't a howl, a scratch, or a tinkle. It was music, a deep, triumphant melody, sounding like a church organ made of ice and granite. It was "God Rest Ye Merry, Gentlemen," but played in such a slow, solemn tone that it sounded like a funeral march. The music wasn't coming from the radio. It seemed to emanate from the very walls, from the icy air, from the floor beneath his feet. And with the music came the light. A blinding white light burst through the cracks around the front door, through the covered windows, so intense that it made everyone blink and look away. It was the antithesis of the darkness that enveloped them, but it was equally terrifying in its relentless purity. It was the light of a celestial spotlight focused on their judgment. The front door handle, dented and bent from the attacks, began to glow with a white heat. The metal smoked and then melted, dripping onto the wooden floor like drops of liquid tin. The wood around the lock began to char, darkening and emitting a smell of burnt pine. He wasn't breaking down the door. He was sanctifying it, or desecrating it. "He's coming," Grandma Eleanor whispered, her voice thick with religious dread. "The old man, the other one." The music from the invisible organ grew louder, filling the house with its overwhelming weight. The light around the door became so bright that the wood itself began to turn translucent, like parchment illuminated from behind. Through it, Sarah could see a silhouette, tall, imposing, topped by a shape that could be a hat or a pair of twisted horns bathed in the same white light. The door didn't open. It disintegrated, not in shards, but in a swirl of golden sawdust and white sparks that dissipated into the air, revealing the entrance. And there he was, in the frame. It wasn't Krampus. It was something that, for a moment of agonizing hope, seemed familiar. A rich red cloak lined with white black leather boots, a wide leather belt. A long beard, white as freshly fallen snow, but the details were wrong, terribly wrong. The cloak wasn't velvet, but a texture reminiscent of tanned leather, and the white lining wasn't cotton, but a pale, silky down, like that of a giant insect. His beard wasn't made of hair, but of fine strands of ice that intertwined and creaked softly when he moved his head. And his face was youthful, with high cheekbones and a broad smile. But his eyes were two compacted snowballs, perfect and round, without pupils, without soul. And from the side of his red, bulbous nose, a thin line of black soot trickled down, like smoke from a chimney. He wasn't carrying a sack of gifts. On his back, he carried an enormous wicker basket, disproportionately large, which seemed incredibly heavy. From inside the basket came muffled sounds, faint moans, the rattling of chains, and the distant crying of a child. This was St. Nicholas who had visited them. The judge. He stepped into the room, and the wooden floor trembled beneath his weight. The organ music stopped. The air grew still and icy. His snowball gaze swept across the room, past Grandma Eleanor, then Sarah, then Lily, and finally settling on Noah, who was huddled behind the sofa. The voice that came from him was deep, pot-bellied and falsely cheerful, like that of a toy commercial announcer whose voice had faded from a scratched vinyl record. "Merry Christmas. he thundered, and the windows rattled. I checked my list. I double-checked it. And I found some children who haven't been very good. Her smile widened, stretching the skin around the snowballs that were her eyes in an anatomically impossible way. He raised a gloved hand. The glove was red leather, but the fingertips were torn, revealing long, curved claws the color of dark amber. He pointed directly at Noah. "You, little liar. You, who hides sins in the snow." Her voice lost some of its feigned cheerfulness, gaining a metallic and dangerous tone. "And you," her eyes darted to Lily, full of disdain and ingratitude, "and you," now to Sarah, weaving lies to avoid discomfort. He lowered his hand and walked heavily toward the center of the room, his basket creaking ominously. "But don't worry, he said, joy returning to his voice like a disposable mask. St. Nicholas is forgiveness. St. Nicholas is a second chance. He stopped in front of the Christmas tree, ignoring the black resin figure and the unsettling presents. He looked at the few normal gifts that were still there, the ones the family had given each other. I brought gifts, special gifts, to help them see the error of their ways. With a swift flick of his claws, he ripped open a gift with Lily's name on it. Inside, there wasn't the blouse she wanted. There was a hand mirror, old-fashioned and framed in silver. He picked it up and threw it to her. Lily, her reflexes dulled by fear, caught it. In the reflection, she didn't see her own face. She saw an older version of herself, her face marked by bitterness, her eyes cold and empty, alone in a dark room. It was a vision of her potential future, a prophecy of her own darkness. She dropped the mirror with a scream, and it shattered on the floor. St. Nicholas laughed, a sound like bells breaking. Insight, a wonderful gift. He then turned to Noah, his smile frozen. And for you, little liar, something to help you tell the truth. From his basket, he pulled something long and thin, wrapped in a cloth. He unwrapped it. It was a human tongue, pale and gray, dry as leather. He threw it at Noah's feet. "Use it wisely," he thundered. Noah recoiled, stumbling and falling backward, his throat making a dry, choking sound. The fake St. Nicholas then looked at Sarah, his head tilting in a bird-like motion, and to Mom, who tries so hard to keep the family together. He reached into the basket and pulled out a heavy, rusty chain with shackles on both ends. "Give me your hands." The smile had completely vanished from his face. The snowballs that were his eyes seemed colder than ever. "It's time to come with me. It's time to learn to be good. Forever." He took a heavy step toward them, the chain swinging in his grip, the basket on his back groaning with the weight of past souls. St. Nicholas's visit was over. The hour of punishment had begun. The clinking of the rusty chain in the false St. Nicholas's claws was the most terrifying sound Sarah had ever heard. It was the sound of the end. He took a heavy step toward her, his smile now a thin, cruel line, his snow-packed eyes reflecting the stark panic on his face. "Back!" Sarah shouted, raising the brass candlestick, her only foolish weapon against that perverse deity. He laughed, a dry sound like branches breaking in winter. Brave, but empty. It was then that Grandma Eleanor from her armchair began to sing. It wasn't the meaningless melody from before. It was an old song, a long-forgotten Christmas ballad, the Coventry Carol. Her voice, frail and trembling, filled the icy air, a faint line of humanity against that horror. "Luli, Lula, thou little tiny child." The fake St. Nicholas stopped. His head turned toward the old password, a disconcertingly quick movement. He didn't seem angry, but intrigued, like a cat hearing a new sound. "Bye, bye, Lully, Lullay." As Eleanor sang, the shadows in the room began to deepen, to stir. They weren't the shadows of Krampus or St. Nicholas. They were different, more subtle, more personal. The point of view shifted to Lily, still trembling from the shock of the broken mirror. She saw the first shadow materialize near the fireplace. It was the silhouette of a man, tall and slightly stooped. He wore a knitted sweater that their grandfather always wore at Christmas. The shadow had no face, but she knew who it was. He stood there, watching, and a wave of melancholy warmth and security emanated from him, an agonizing contrast to the deadly cold of the intruder. The false St. Nicholas looked at the shadow and growled softly. Ghost, just an echo. But then another shadow appeared. A woman, her hair pulled back in a bun, wearing the apron their other grandmother, who had died years ago, used to cook with. She knelt down, her shadowy form hovering over the fragments of Lily's broken mirror. For a moment, the shards stopped reflecting terror and instead showed the smiling, loving face of the grandmother, just as Lily remembered her. Noah, still on the ground, saw a third shadow. A boy, about his age, quietly playing with an old wooden cart. His uncle, who had died young, decades ago. The cart rolled toward Noah, stopping inches from his hand. They weren't threatening. They were protective. Ghosts of Christmases past, drawn by Eleanor's singing, by the memory of what the house should have been. The false St. Nicholas seemed to grow smaller, his oppressive white light diminishing before the quiet, dark solidarity of the ghosts. He shook the chain. They cannot protect them. They are memory. I am consequence. But courage was returning to Sarah. She saw the opportunity. They are the reason, she cried, her voice gaining strength. The reason we fight. You won't take my children? She lunged forward, not to attack St. Nicholas, but the Christmas tree. She grabbed the little gingerbread man spy, the one with the pea eyes and the pointed smile. Ignoring her grandmother's warning, she crushed it in her hand. A sensation of icy needles pierced his palm, and a sharp squeal, inaudible to human ears, echoed in his gut. The false St. Nicholas shuddered, as if he had been poked. The familiar ghosts grew more solid. The grandfather stepped forward, placing himself between the intruder and his granddaughter. The grandmother stood, her shadowy arms opening wide as if to embrace the entire room. The boy, Noah's uncle, picked up his wooden cart and threw it. The ghostly toy passed right through St. Nicholas's chest, who recoiled with a grunt of surprise and anger. They couldn't hurt him physically, but they were eroding his reality, his authority. They were reminding the house that it was a place of love, not judgment. The false St. Nicholas roared in frustration, a sound no longer human or joyful, but the roar of a winter storm. The white light burst forth from him again, stronger, attempting to dispel the shadows. The ghosts flickered, becoming translucent, but did not disappear. Eleanor's song kept them anchored, a tenuous thread of faith against despair. Lily acted next. She remembered the present Noah had opened, the Christmas ornament with their altered photo. She crawled over to the broken pieces, ignoring the sticky liquid, and picked up the piece that showed Noah's scratched face. She held it like a talisman. You can't divide us. She yelled at the fake St. Nicholas, her voice filled with a fury that surpassed her fear. We are family. She threw the shard of glass at him. It missed him, but flew towards the heavy basket on his back. The shard hit the side of the wicker basket with a dull thud, and from within, a voice cried out. Not a groan of pain, but a familiar voice, weak and filled with infinite dread. Sarah? Lily? Help me. It was their father's voice, the voice they hadn't heard in years, the voice Sarah cried to hear every night. The voice Noah barely remembered. The world stopped. The roar of the false St. Nicholas cut through. The familiar ghosts hesitated. Eleanor's song died on her lips. All eyes turned to the basket. The false St. Nicholas watched them, and then a new smile, slow and profoundly cruel, spread across his face. He had found a new bait, a bait that none of them could resist. He shook the basket, and his father's voice wept again, now weaker. It's so cold here. The facade of the Salvador had completely disappeared. Now, only the jailer remained. He took a step back, toward the empty door, the winter night and the hungry howls waiting for him. Come and get him, he whispered, his voice a chilling seduction. If you dare. And then he turned and disappeared into the darkness, the heavy basket with its agonizing contents swaying on his back, leaving behind a family torn apart between horror and a torturous, impossible hope. His father's voice, a dying echo of a buried past, hung in the room like a ghost more real than all the others. The silence that followed the departure of the false St. Nicholas was of a new kind, pierced not by fear of the unknown, but by the torment of a known and painful possibility. "Dad," Noah whispered, his voice broken. He stood up, his eyes fixed on the empty doorway where the figure had vanished. "It was him," Lily whimpered, her disdain crumbling, replaced by the raw despair of a girl who missed her father. "Mom, it was him!" Sarah felt the ground give way beneath her. Logic screamed that it was impossible. A trick, the cruelest bait. But her heart, the part of her that never healed, clung to that thread of hope with the strength of a drowning man. The familiar ghosts around her had begun to dissipate, their protective energy depleted, leaving behind only the icy emptiness and the memory of the voice. "He took them," Grandma Eleanor said, her lucidity fading again into a murmur. "The bogeyman. He takes them to his winter garden, forever frozen, never at peace." The perspective shifted for Sarah. The mother and wife within her waged war against the survivor. Going after him was a trap. Staying was surrendering to despair. She looked at her children's faces. Lily, on the verge of tears, Noah, with a dangerous determination gleaming in his eyes, and knew the choice had already been made. "He wants us to go," Sarah said, her voice surprisingly firm. "That's what the list wants. That's what this whole thing has been. A trial. And we failed. Then we'll take him back," Noah shouted, his fists clenched. "We won't let him take Dad." "How, Noah?" Lily asked, her voice trembling. "How do we fight against that?" Sarah looked at the brass candlestick in her hands. It was useless. Her mind raced, passing through corrupted Christmas symbols. The tree, the light, the music, the gift, the present. Her eyes fell on the small, untouched brown paper gift that Grandma was still holding. "The first one, the messenger." "He gave us a tool," Sarah whispered, a horrifying yet brilliant idea forming in her mind. The messenger came first. To see, to judge. But what if? What if we could send a message back? She knelt before Eleanor's armchair. "Mother, I need the present." The old woman looked at her, her eyes clouded. "It's an eye. An eye that sees." "Exactly," Sarah said, gently taking it from her lap. The rough surface of the paper was cold to the touch. She turned to her children. "We're going after him, but we're not going to fight with his weapons. We're going to use our own." Without hesitation, she pulled the dark red ribbon. The brown paper unraveled, not tearing but unrolling like an ancient scroll. What fell into her hand was not an ornament, but a single glass eye, large and icy blue, with a leather strap attached to it. The iris was not solid. Within it, tiny snowflakes fell in an endless loop. "What is that?" Noah asked. "A way of seeing the truth," Sarah replied, her voice somber. "The truth he doesn't want us to see." She tied the leather strap around her head, placing the glass eye on her forehead, like a blind third eye. "Nothing happened. We need to go where he is," she said, into the darkness. They moved like sleepwalkers to the front door. The garden was immersed in an uncanny stillness. The snow had stopped. The snowman was still there, his form now even more distorted, his arms outstretched as if to embrace, his face a mask of frozen malice. And behind him, at the edge of the woods, a faint green light flickered between the trees, hovering above the ground like a will-o'-the-wisp. The basket. He should have left a trail. Sarah took her first step out of the house into the deep snow. The cold was a shock. Lily and Noah followed her, hand in hand. Grandma Eleanor stayed behind at the door, a silent sentinel. Each step was an effort. The snow reached Noah's knees. The silence was absolute, no wind, no howling. Only the sound of his panting breath and the crunch of snow under his boots. As they approached the green light, Sarah felt the glass eye in her forehead grow cold. So cold it burned her skin. She stared toward the light. Through the glass eye, the forest was no longer a forest. The trees were pillars of pale, twisted flesh, their bark the texture of wrinkled skin. The snow beneath their feet was not white, but an ash of ground bones. And the green light was not light, but a mist emanating from an opening in the ground, a hole leading to a realm of frost and shadows. It was the entrance, the winter garden, and in front of that hole, with his back to them, stood the fake St. Nicholas. His basket was on the ground beside him. He wasn't looking at the hole, he was looking at the snowman. Through the eye of truth, Sarah saw the true nature of the snowman. It was not snow, but a column of compacted souls, silent and terrified faces emerging and disappearing on its white surface. And the silver whistle, the object of Noah's transgression, gleamed on his chest like a metallic and malevolent heart. The false St. Nicholas raised his head, sensing her presence. He turned slowly. He no longer looked like a man in a suit. His form was taller, more bestial. The horns under his hat were real and twisted. His snowy eyes shone with the same green light as the hole. "You came," he growled, his voice now a mixture of radio static and the crunch of ice. "You came to join my collection. Give me back my husband." Sarah screamed, her voice echoing in the distorted forest. He laughed and kicked the basket. It toppled over, and a pale, translucent figure, the image of her deceased husband, slid out, chained and weeping silently. It was a ghost, a shell, not a man, but their love for him made him real enough to break their hearts. Noah screamed and ran forward, blinded by rage and pain. "Noah, no!" Sarah screamed. The false St. Nicholas simply stretched out a claw. A branch from a flesh tree beside him moved, quick as a whip, and coiled around Noah's ankle, pulling him up, hanging him upside down above the snow of bone ash. Lily ran towards her brother, but the snow around her came to life, forming pale, bony hands that grabbed her legs, pulling her down. Sarah was paralyzed, the eye of truth showing her the futility of it all. She was alone against a lesser god of winter's darkness. He walked toward her, ignoring the captured children. The mother, the weaver of lies, "You will be the centerpiece of my family tree." He stretched out his claws to grab her. It was then that Grandma Eleanor, still at the door of the house, hundreds of meters away, began to sing again. The same funeral ballad, but this time her voice was strong and clear, charged with a power that was not hers, but that of the house itself, of the land, of memory. And behind the false St. Nicholas, the snowman, the beacon of souls, trembled. The silver whistle on his chest clicked, and then it exploded. It wasn't an explosion of metal, but of light, a pure white light, the true light of love and repentance, fueled by Noah's ultimate sacrifice in confronting the monster. The light bathed the twisted forest, and the pillars of flesh screamed and writhed. The false St. Nicholas screamed, a sound of pure rage and agony, as his form began to smoke and crumble under the light. He was a creature of winter darkness, and that flash of genuine sacrifice was a sun in his nocturnal world. The snow claws that held Lily crumbled. The branch of flesh that held Noah retracted, and he fell into the snow. The false St. Nicholas staggered back toward the green hole. He grabbed the ghost of Sarah's husband and, with one last look of infinite hatred for her, leaped into the darkness, dragging the weeping ghost with him. The whistle light went out. Silence returned. Sarah ran to her children, embracing them in the royal snow, under the royal trees, the forest having returned to normal. The threat had receded. The price had been paid. They looked at the spot where the snowman had been. Now there was only a puddle of clean water in the silver whistle, now dull and harmless, resting in the center. They were alive. But something had been broken inside them, something no Christmas light could fix. And the hole in the woods, now invisible to the naked eye, was still there. And they knew, with a certainty that would chill them forever, that the winter in their hearts would never truly end. The whistle's light died, taking with it the last vestige of the active nightmare. The surrounding forest was just a forest again, bare trees against a heavy, still night sky. The snow beneath their feet was just snow, cold and clean. The silence that descended was absolute, a void after the storm. Sarah, Lily, and Noah remained muddy in the snow, their bodies trembling with exhaustion and shock. Their embrace was tight, an anchor of flesh and blood in a world that had slipped off its axis. Grandma Eleanor's house in the distance was dark and silent, its door still wide open to the night like a gaping mouth. They rose, their movements slow and painful, and began to walk back. None of them spoke. What was there to say? Their father was lost again, but this time in a more cruel and definitive way. They had faced the judge of winter and survived, but at the cost of what pieces of their souls? Grandma Eleanor was waiting for them at the door. Her eyes were clear, the lucidity of the battle's end lingering in her mind. She didn't say a word, just opened her arms and enveloped them all in a silent embrace that smelled of mothballs and dried tears. Inside, the destruction was a silent testament. The Christmas tree lay toppled, its ornaments broken and scattered across the floor like confetti at a funeral. Torn wrapping paper and bone fragments still stained the carpet. The air was icy, the generator having fallen silent sometime during the final confrontation. The house was dead. They spent the rest of the day in a state of numbness. Sarah rekindled the fireplace with the last bits of wood, her only practical accomplishment. The light from the flames danced on the walls but couldn't reach the darkness in her eyes. They nestled on the sofa, wrapped in blankets, listening to the silence. The perspective shifted to Noah. The guilt he carried had transformed. It was no longer about the whistle or the lie. It was about having survived. The image of his father, pale and tearful, being dragged into the darkness, was burned into his retina. He looked at his hands, expecting to see them stained with bone ash, but they were clean. Purity was the greatest illusion of all. The next morning, the snow had completely stopped. A pale, wintry sun shone on a washed-out white world. Beauty was a mockery. The storm that had isolated them had passed. The outside world, with its normal concerns and blissful ignorance, was accessible again. Sarah made a call on the landline, which miraculously worked. The road would be cleared in a few hours, they told him. Help was on the way. The words sounded hollow, as if they were from a different language. While they waited, they began to clean. It was an automatic act, an attempt to impose order on the chaos. They gathered the shards of glass, swept up the bone fragments, and threw them into the fire. They wrapped the remains of the corrupted gifts in an old sheet. No one looked at what was burning. When they arrived at the spot where the brown paper gift had been, they found only a small mound of black ashes. The glass eye had disappeared. It was Lily who, while straightening the fallen tree, found something caught on a high branch. It was the original messenger ornament, the twisted figure of black resin. It was intact. She held it in the palm of her hand. It wasn't cold. It was warm, like an ember about to go out, and the empty eye sockets no longer seemed threatening, but rather sad, endlessly weary. She carefully placed it back on the branch. At noon, a snowplow and a police car appeared on the unobstructed road. The officers were polite, concerned. They listened to Sarah's rehearsed story about a terrible storm, damage to the house, the stress of her elderly grandmother. They accepted it, their eyes scanning the messy room with a professional pen. They didn't see the scratched runes on the hallway door. They didn't smell the lingering odor of burnt flesh and despair. The family was taken to a hotel in the city. The room was warm, anonymous, safe. It was a cage of normalcy. That night, sitting on the hotel bed, eating takeout food, Lily turned on the TV. One channel was broadcasting a Christmas special, full of bright colors and loud laughter. The image flickered. For a fraction of a second, the presenter's face distorted, his eyes becoming lifeless snowballs, his mouth opening in a wide, impossible smile before returning to normal. Lily turned off the TV. No one commented. The days passed. Christmas came and went without fanfare. They returned home to their apartment in the city, far from Grandma Eleanor's house, which would remain closed, perhaps forever. They tried to resume their lives. Sarah went back to work. Lily went back to school. Noah, too. But winter followed them. For Sarah, it was the sound of sleigh bells in the distance, which sounded very much like the tinkling of black bells. It was the smell of pine in the mall that made her feel nauseous. For Lily, it was her own reflection in every shop window. She always checked, always dreading seeing the bitter, lonely woman in the ghostly mirror staring back at her. For Noah, it was silence. A silence he filled with the echo of his father's voice, whispering on the car radio and the hum of the heater in his own blood. It's so cold here. They were healed, but scarred. Free, but forever chained to the memory of that night. The true horror of Krampus, they realized, was not in the confrontation, nor in the kidnapping. It was in the legacy. It was in the way. He forever corrupted the season of joy, transforming every twinkling light into a potential spying eye, every joyful song into a potential twisted lament. Years later, on a particularly cold Christmas Eve, Noah, now a young adult, found himself in front of the fireplace in his own apartment. He held a single ornament, a simple red sphere. He turned it in his fingers, and for a moment, under the firelight, the color seemed to darken, becoming the deep, velvety red of a satin ribbon. He heard, or thought he heard, the faintest rustling of chains in the apartment above. He wasn't frightened. He just sighed, a cloud of steam rising in the warm air, and hung the ornament on the tree. Krampus hadn't taken his brother that night. He'd taken much more. He'd taken peace. And every year, when the snow began to fall, Noah knew, with a calm and terrible certainty, that the sack-wearing man was still out there making his list, and that, somewhere, in the white silence of winter, he could still hear the echo of his father's cries, a sound that would never, ever fade away.